Welcome to the Manager's Masterclass, the Developments in Safeguarding Masterclass on Reducing Parental Conflict. This is our one for April. Just to make you aware of some general kind of arrangements. First off, please be aware of your environmental noise. If you do have your microphone on, please switch it off. It should be off by default. So please mute your microphone. The session is being recorded, so please switch off your camera if you can. You won't appear in the final video, a recording of this, because I tend to try and cut everybody out, but it just makes it a little bit easier. And could you please put your name and organisation in the chat? And if you have any questions, would you mind just popping them in the chat? And then what we'll do at the appropriate point is I'll raise them with Sarah, or we can unmute your mic at that point. So all of our masterclasses are recorded, and the slides of the recording will be available on our website at that address there. The videos of the masterclass will also be available on our YouTube channel. I apologise for the UCU, EU, whatever link, but we need people to follow us on YouTube. So I'd be really grateful if you could pop over onto YouTube either right now or straight after this and just follow us on there, because once we get a certain number of people, we can actually then name our channel, but we have to have a certain number of people before we can do that. So please don't forget, like and subscribe to our videos just to make them a little bit more visible in the Google algorithms for everybody. So what I would like to do is introduce Sarah Atkins. She's our practice supervisor in the Children and Family Service, and she's going to be talking to us today about the very interesting subject of reducing parental conflict. So I'll hand over to you, Sarah. Welcome.
Hi, okay. Thank you, Hayden. Hi, everybody. So I'm now going to start the technical part of trying to share my screen with everybody. So let's just, oh, hang on a minute. That's not right. Let me just come out. I've forgotten to add the sound on. So that's not a good start, is it? Let me just, we'll get used to this. Can't listen to videos if we haven't got the sound. So that's not good. Okay, I think we're just about there. There we go. Hopefully that's a good. So I'm hoping everybody can see my slides. I'm sure that you'll just put a little comment in the chat if you can't. And I've just put my headset on just because as usual, something's happened outside my house and they started digging up the road. So hopefully you won't get any external noise coming from that. So as Hayden said, I'm Sarah Atkins. I'm practice supervisor in the Stronger Foundations team, but I'm practice supervisor for what we call Stronger Relationships. And I've been in sort of part of the parental conflict program for probably the last 3 years, really, when it's really taken sort of like over a lot of the work that we've been doing in the Children and Family Service around sort of safeguarding. So the DWP introduced the programme and they had some funding that was available, which was great for workforce development. So I've been spending quite a lot of time trying to put on training for not just internal but external people. So it's really good to see people today from a range of different services. And we've only got an hour. Usually the training varies between half a day and a full day, so it is going to be a whistle-stop tour around the programme and also around what exactly parental conflict is. So I hope you enjoy it, and as I said, there will be some time to ask questions, or you can just email me. So what are the aims of the DWP Parental Conflict Programme? So basically, it's to improve knowledge of what parental conflict is and how it differs from domestic abuse, because it does differ. It sits underneath the threshold of domestic abuse, and we shouldn't be getting the two confused. It also gives us the opportunity to reflect upon the nature of that conflict and look at the common patterns of behaviour. We work very systemically now within North Yorkshire County Council's Children and Family Service, so it's a good opportunity for us to start to talk to parents about about the patterns of behaviour that are not just happening now, but have happened previously and throughout their experiences when they were growing up and as well when they were children within their own parenting. And then we look at enabling practitioners to consider the impact of poor parental relationships on families, children and young people. And this is the bit that I'm the most passionate about, is understanding the impact of parental conflict and how that impacts on children's development and outcomes. We're looking at trying to increase the awareness of the link between parental conflict and not just children's social, emotional and educational outcomes, but also parents. Explore how parental conflict affects the parenting capacity, and explore best practice in starting those conversations with parents about relationships, because we recognise that sometimes this is very, very difficult to do. We're not relationship counsellors, we're not therapists in the way that people want us to be, mediators and couple therapists, but all of us, this is everybody's business. We can all start to have a conversation with the parents that we work with about their relationships. So just to have a little note here that when I'm talking and throughout this training, I talk about parents, but really for the purpose of this training, we refer to the following as parents and carers who are in a relationship with each other, whether married or not, parent carers who have separated or divorced, biological and step parents, foster and adoptive parents, and parents within the LGBTQ+ community. For parental conflict, we are working with those parents who are either still together or who have separated and recognised that their behaviour is having an impact on their children. It's very difficult to work in the way that we do with the tools that we use when parents are within that acrimonious, separated relationship where they just won't speak to each other and where they forget that the focus of their relationship is the needs of the children. So that some of the tools don't apply to working with those kinds of parents, but we are looking at being able to use new funding opportunities to extend and expand our working relationship with separated parents where there is that acrimonious separation. So it's now well established that a strong parental couple relationship provides that emotional bedrock for the healthy development of babies, children, young people, and that this is particularly crucial in the early years of life. Yet for many parents, becoming that parent and adapting to family life can be extremely challenging and can be extremely stressful. So we all know when we're working with children that there's differences in hopes, expectations and values, and these often emerge and over time can become magnified and exaggerated, particularly when parents are worried and exhausted around that financial, social problems and pressures. So it's not really surprising that couples often experience a dip in relationship satisfaction and increased relationship distress and conflict. And if we think about it, what is a relationship? It's a very complex thing. How do we learn about relationships and behaviour? Where did our modelling come from? What was our observations of our parents, for example, when they were in a relationship? Have we all come from families where there's been difficult relationships? How did we observe how our parents managed to overcome and resolve some of that conflict that was going on? Because there's conflict with every family, we know that. And what happens if you're a child with care experience with multiple families? So where there's lots and lots of different families that you're going to, and as a child, you're watching and observing that difference in range of the way that they do that conflict resolution. How do we think about those parenting styles, that attachment, the love that parents show to each other as well as their children? A word that is not very often discussed within a couple relationship and also within a practitioner parent relationship. Something again that we're trying to do in North Yorkshire is to get parents to talk a lot more openly about that 4-letter word love. That stimulation, communication and interaction, where does all that come from? How do we show that? between ourselves as parents and as adults towards our children. We need to think about the language that a child hears and the behaviour that they observe. And when the key times of relationship comes under pressure, how do we interact with each other as a couple? How do our parents react and interact with their children? And how do we know when a relationship is in trouble? So it's not surprising that when couples do experience that dip in relationship satisfaction, that pattern of decline can often continue, and this can then result in breakdown and sometimes family instability. So when we're doing our work with parents, I do a staying connected course with parents, with individuals, but parents who are going through really difficult, high conflict situations within their relationship. And we often sort of start with this relationship spectrum about this is what we expect, this is what we think about as in terms of that healthy relationship, that open communication, mutual respect for each other, the trust and belief in one another, capable of making decisions together, supporting each other and enjoying that personal time together, which for a lot of our couples, when they are in lots of high pressured situations through work, financial problems and poverty and all kinds of other housing and other issues that they're coping with, they forget about enjoying time together. Then we start to explore a little bit more about what does this unhealthy relationship look like. So these disagreements are happening and they're happening more frequently. There's frequently more fights, or the arguments are being avoided entirely. Trust is a struggle. Boundaries are often crossed, and only spending time with the partner and maybe forgetting about friends and family that are around them to support them. And we know that, as we know in domestic abuse, that when there's that controlling and coercive behaviour where one partner is refusing to let the other partner spend time with family and friends, then obviously that's escalating and moving into domestic abuse. And so then we go through what is abusive behaviour. And certainly for some of the dads that I've worked with, many of them have talked to me quite openly about the fact that they have never recognised that their behaviour is actually controlling and that their behaviour is actually abusive, because they've not necessarily looked at that pattern of behaviour before and correlated it with domestic abuse. So it's very interesting how sometimes people don't recognise that because their behaviour is unhealthy, it could escalate into an abusive relationship. So we know healthy couple relationships are able to build a strong alliance centered on issues that parenting problems throw at them. And they may have differences of opinion on the best way forward, but they can usually find a way of being able to resolve their conflicts away from the children and have a consensus on how to manage things. Healthy couple relationships are often characterized by the ability to keep the child in the center of their thinking, which means they can often put their own needs and their own concerns to one side in order to think about their child's needs and attend to them as a priority. And as we know, all families have conflict in their lives, and that's something that I'll be telling you and running through the thread that runs through this. I don't want you to think that every family that you work with, even within your own families, it's just because you have some conflict in there that your children are going to suffer, or the children of everybody's families are going to suffer. It is a natural, normal part of family life and doesn't necessarily pose a threat to the well-being of children until it becomes more destructive. So I'm just going to play you a quick introduction into what is parental conflict. And this is a video by the Early Intervention Foundation. So can be found on YouTube and can be found on the Early Intervention website if anybody wants to use it for anything that's happening at
Conflict
school.
between parents is normal, but if exposure is frequent, intense, and poorly resolved, this can have a damaging impact on children, resulting in long-term mental health issues and emotional, social, behavioral, and academic problems as they grow up. Today, there is a growing awareness of the importance of the quality of the relationship between parents, whether they are together or separated, and the need to tackle conflict in the best interests of children. There may be lots of services in your area that focus on parenting or the relationship between parents and children, but the ability of these services to help children is likely to be reduced if damaging parental conflict is left unresolved. This is a problem if it means that important local services and programs aren't equipped to improve children's lives in the way we all want them to. Many practitioners and services working at the front line lack the confidence, tools and knowledge to identify and support families where damaging conflict is going on. Many parents only seek help when conflict reaches crisis point. And many families experiencing poverty or financial stress, who are at a greater risk of experiencing damaging conflict, are less likely to get access to vital support. Early intervention to reduce the impact of parental conflict needs to be at the heart of services, to improve outcomes for children and improve the effectiveness of other family support. We can help you to shape these services in your area. Visit our
So as you can see, it's the Early Intervention Foundation, which can be found where that video is if you wanted any more information. The Early Intervention Foundation has got a plethora of information around parental conflict. So let's have a look. Let's have a think about, after seeing that video, what is the definition of parental conflict? How does it differ from from domestic abuse? So the definition is, it's very normal, as I keep saying, that to have different, for parents to have different ideas, opinions, values and priorities. And part of being successful in a relationship with another person is being able to use appropriate communication skills. So differences of opinion can be worked out using healthy conflict resolution strategies. Conflict resolution can be a useful tool in helping children to learn about sharing, negotiating, communicating, apologising and resolving arguments. And however, it's the resolving of the conflict that children need to see modelled within that relationship. If parents do not communicate effectively with each other, it can result in chronic, unresolved conflict between them. And those same patterns of angry confrontations are repeated over and over again, with often no resolution or changes taking place. It's these frequent, intense and poorly resolved disagreements and arguments when children start to become anxious and their health and well-being is put at risk. And the most important words in that definition that you can see on the screen is frequent, intense and poorly resolved. So this is when we describe that conflict as moving into destructive, chronic or toxic. All the evidence that's been done previously, just recently, and from the DWP and the Early Intervention Foundation, highlights that if children are witnessing intense arguments between parents and fallouts daily, or at least 3 times a week, they're not seeing that compromise, that tenderness, the love, or listening to the words of affection between parents and partners, then that relationship's struggling. And children may worry about their own safety and their parents' safety, even if there hasn't actually been any threatened or violence or actual physical violence that's been taken place. And as we know, that children who are affected by that relationship distress, the ongoing conflict is detrimental to child's well-being, development and outcomes. So very briefly, how does it differ? How does parental conflict differ from domestic abuse? Now, although sometimes parental conflict can lead to violent clashes between the adults, I have to stress there is not an imbalance of power. So one adult isn't frightened of their partner or what they may do. There isn't evidence of any coercion or controlling behaviour, even though sometimes the conflict in the home seems like there's one person being more controlling than another. They are both equal. So when we look at this domestic abuse continuum, which is what we all use now right across the county, we're sort of looking at these 3 areas here. So these sort of 3, the light purple, the dark purple and the grey area. So any work that we do around parental conflict is usually around these 3 areas. So as we can see, number 1, the parenting that happens within that relationship, household chores and worries, they're all shared equally between both parents. And parents spend quality time together and also have separate interests. They compromise and know when to say sorry. And children are usually happy and very positive within that relationship. And that can happen within blended families, it can happen within step families. any families, but that's the usual respectful, equal, cooperative bit where children can see that conflict is often negotiated and compromised. But then when we get into the next part, number 2, the next purple part, we can often see here that things are starting to escalate a little bit and parents are arguing in front of the children more and more, or there's those long periods of extended silence. Difficulties are played down between the two parents and not addressed. Children are beginning to be affected by those arguments and may feel worried when they hear the shouting that goes on. Number 3, this bit here is where it's starting to escalate and get even worse. Parents are arguing a lot. There's probably going to be a lot of shouting, slamming of doors. Parents may be undermining each other and using the children to score points off each other. There's often an uncomfortable atmosphere and children talk about walking on eggshells. Children may feel forgotten about. They may not want to go home, or they may feel that they're torn between parents about taking sides. And then the grey area is where we've got high conflict happening within a family. Parents are arguing a lot, and this can sometimes spill over into physical violence both ways. There's that unpredictable atmosphere, children feeling frightened, anxious. This may be affecting their behaviours at home or at school. They may become withdrawn or they may become aggressive. And a bit further on in the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about the impact that this kind of parental conflict has on children. And then we move into the domestic abuse arena. So we're here, and often our usual referrals then go to IDAS to get help for these parents. So the power in the relationship's no longer balanced. The abuser may be manipulative with intimidation, threats of violence, or mind games. They may be controlling things like food or routines that the children are in, and the victim may be isolated and putting on an act that everything is fine. Children may again be used as a weapon and feel shame or scared, and their mental health and behaviours are very much affected. And then we get into the height of the domestic abuse, and there's very clearly an abuser and a victim who's at risk of significant harm, and all aspects of family life are then controlled by that one parent. And again, we all know, as in terms of domestic abuse, that children are then at risk of significant physical and emotional harm, and children are often traumatised by being caught in the middle of what's been happening at home. So I'm just going to show you some very, very quickly about different types of behaviours that children might see, feel or hear. So these are the types of behaviours associated with parental conflict that maybe children could be witnessing daily. And children, when interviewed, as I've just previously said, often talk about walking on eggshells so as not to provoke those disagreements or arguments in the home. The additional problem is that when parents are so wrapped up in all of this kind of behaviour, arguing and trying to score points off each other, they have no or very little time to focus on the quality of their parenting, caregiving relationship towards their children. So obviously children can be witnessing this, they may be hearing this, they may be feeling totally helpless about some of these behaviours that are taking place on a daily basis. And then when we look at the different types of abuse, we can recognise, we all know, we've all done our domestic abuse training, but this just gives you a quick snapshot, a brief snapshot of the different types of behaviour that children could be exposed to. So let's think a little bit about what could be the reasons for parents to argue frequently. What are the key times that a relationship comes under pressure? We've done quite a lot of consultation with parents, and so has the DWP and the EIF. And the EIF have completed research and a survey with parents in 2019, which really blows your mind a little bit, about the reasons why parents disagree and argue. And I think if we look at all of these different reasons, we'll see that there's probably very different reasons for parents arguing now than maybe when we were all younger, and certainly for when I was a lot younger, which is a long time ago, which didn't have all of these different kinds of themes and reasons as to why parents would argue. But which you can see, we've got the main stressors sort of being money, new baby, sort of social media. And of course, one of the main reasons is the fallout of separation and the breakdown of relationships. But if we look at all of these characters, we've sort of categories, we've sort of got these personal ones, which maybe would have been our parents as well would have had some of these going on. We've certainly had them, you know, for me as a parent, I would have certainly had all of these. So you've got things like friends, life experiences, that blended family life if you've come from, you know, step families and so on and so forth, maybe employment status. We've got all of the external in the orange that's going on. So things like our cultures are very different, maybe schools, maybe financial stability, our education, employment status, religion, and so on and so forth. And then we've got things like the external that's maybe new to or some of us anyway, and where we've got technology. So we've got sort of the computers and all of the new stuff that's come through, like the phones, mobile phones, laptops, gaming, all influence some of those parent relationships and could be the start of some of those conversations around heated exchanges and disagreements. And then, of course, we've got social media, and we all know about the social media problems and the issues that Facebook, online dating apps, YouTube, access to pornography can sort of highlight within a relationship. So it's no wonder that parents really struggle sometimes with that positivity within their relationship when they've got all of these things to navigate round. And when we've talked to our own parents, when we've done the work with our own parents, these are really the most important aspects that they've sort of highlighted as to be the reason why they start to disagree and why maybe their relationships break down. And it's an interesting piece of work to be able to compare the two of them and to start to add things in that maybe we've seen on the other picture and the other examples, to start to think about maybe our work needs to be a bit wider than some of the issues that our parents are facing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the conflict cycle now, which is something, again, that we do quite a lot with our parents, about recognizing when parents are in this vicious cycle and when they can't actually get themselves out of it, so that we know stress arouses feelings, feelings trigger that behavior, behavior incites others, others increase the stress, and it keeps going round and round. And parents get stuck in this vicious cycle of conflict, which is obviously categorized by those negative behavior patterns and poor communication. So we tend to use, as in terms of when I'm doing staying connected, we use this Robinson's model, which I think explains that cycle quite well, really, starting with something that creates that tension between the couple, which could be any of those reasons or more than one of those reasons that we've just been looking at. And the tension's then linked to lots of other unresolved issues that have maybe been bubbling up underneath the surface. The tension then leads to that role dilemma, or blaming the other person for the tension and the problem. And then both parents start to gather those injustices or that ammunition, which they then escalate into the confronting stage of the conflict cycle, because it's about winning, not the resolution. And the confrontation may be shortly after the tension, or maybe be building up continuously for weeks and weeks or months later. And all of these elements then lead on to that critical adjusting phase, which, as Robinson explains, has 4 options. So what they tend to do is that the ammunition that parents have gathered just isn't enough. So they start to go round the cycle again and start to gather more ammunition about things that are going wrong within the relationship and whose fault it is. So we start to get back down into the blaming. We then get the argument that escalates back here, and so it can go round. Or they could think, well, we haven't got enough things out there's, you know, and start to think back to historical things that have happened between the two of them. Or they start to look at trying to get out of the conversation, making an early exit, and maybe even agreeing to disagree, but still not resolving the issues that they're fighting about. And the only way, Robinson says, to get out of this cycle is by resolution. So it's a very quick way of being able to explain how the cycle continues. And if the resolution isn't there, and if somebody isn't helping this couple to get out of this cycle, then it just keeps going on and keeps going on. And this is what children are obviously observing on a daily basis. I just want to play this next little video just to show you how this can actually act. And now, It's not brilliant as in terms of the sound on it, but it has got subtitles. So I just want you to sort of have a little look at that conflict cycle and think about what this couple are doing.
Look, I'm really sorry that I'm late. A situation arose at work and I was the only one that could deal with it. I'm not hungry. I had a sandwich earlier.
You promised.
I know I promised.
It's just like Harry and me just come at the bottom of your list every single time. Yes, we do. 2 hours ago you said you were going to be home. That's why I bothered to cook. That's why I bothered to tidy up and make the place nice.
Since this promotion,
Oh,
it means
so
that
sick of
anytime
hearing about
anything goes
promotion.
wrong, the buck stops with me. I'm having to babysit an entire team now.
I'm so sorry that your life is so high-powered and exciting and challenging.
That sounds exciting, does it?
It certainly sounds a
exciting.
hell of a lot more exciting than being stuck at home with a 6-month-old baby who just wants to feed constantly, that you can't do anything. I can't even go to the toilet without having to take him with me.
Let me take you back to a conversation we had last year.
Oh my God!
You signed up to this.
Michael,
You agreed
I'm your
to
wife,
raise
not your
our
client.
son. You
Stop
agreed
talking
to
to me
raise
like
our
we're in
son,
court.
and I agreed to accept this promotion.
I did not agree.
That's what you
to
signed
you
up
coming
to.
in past 8 o'clock every single night. That when you do come in, all you do is get your laptop out and start work. I didn't know it was going to mean that you wouldn't even sleep in the same bed as me. That you'd go into the spare room.
Oh, wait a minute. That is not fair. I am in the spare room to make sure that I can get some sleep.
No, you're in the spare room because you don't want to be near me.
Oh, come on. That's got nothing to do with
Admit
it.
it! You don't want to be near me!
Oh, come on.
I'm just
That's
this kind
rubbish.
of ugly, invisible person who's just expected to stay at home, look after the baby,
Tell me what I'm supposed to do.
tidy up. It's so boring, you have no idea. And then
Tell me what I'm supposed to do.
I don't know,
What,
Michael.
give up my job?
I don't know.
Well, tell me. Tell me
I
what the answer
don't know.
is.
All I know is I'm feeling really desperate and I'm feeling stuck. And I look forward all day to my husband coming back home to me. And when you do finally walk through that door, you've got nothing for me, Michael.
That's
you
what
ignore
we
me completely. You've
signed
got
up to.
nothing for me.
So as you can see, there's all of those different stages of that cycle. And when we work with parents, we sort of tend to go through this and freeze frame and say, what could we have done differently? What could you have done differently? And I think it just explains the cycle really well. Unfortunately, I'm just rushing through it just to show you and demonstrate to you. But obviously, the problem is when we've got that signs of that vicious cycle going on, we've got all of these things happening within it. And so the solution to this cycle is only about trying to think about breaking the cycle and think about how we can find resolution, how the couple can find resolution, and how we can help them as practitioners to maybe talk about something that they could do differently instead of behaving in the way that they are doing. Because all that would happen then in the next part of the cycle is the same issues would come through and the same things would be started to be talked about. And as we could see, that mum there wasn't even sleeping or had that intimacy with her husband. So she keeps drawing on other things that are happening. So if you think about parents behaving in this way and children observing that on a regular basis, that must be really difficult for children to live with. So also around relationship breakdown, we work very closely within what's called the Gottman Institute of Relationships. And so John Gottman is a bit of a guru, and he will explain that there are 4 ways that we communicate when we're in conflict with partners. So there's the criticism, when saying things like you always, you never, putting the person down, name calling, using sarcasm, looking down on the person and making the person feel rejected and hurt. And then what happens is the person that's receiving all of that kind of information starts to defend themselves, which is a natural response to that criticism. So defends their actions, places blame on the other person. And again, I think you could see that in the video that I've just shown you. You never think about me. You never think about what I'm going through. This is your fault, not mine. And then there's that contempt, the number one predictor of divorce or separation, assuming that moral superiority stance over their partner, despising someone and disrespecting them and using sarcasm. And then we have stonewalling. And this usually when the listener becomes so flooded with emotion, when they get into that fight or flight mode. And according to John Gottman, when partners are arguing and when couples are arguing like this, the heart races at 100 beats a minute. And so when they're in the middle of that conflict, they then get that tunnel vision and lose that ability to listen effectively or empathize with the other person. And sometimes when they're in the middle of that, there's no compromise or negotiation. And so sometimes it's best to take themselves out of the situation to calm down, but then to come back in and to resolve the issue when both parties are calmer. So I think it's a really good, again, another model that we tend to work with our families. So now we're just going to do the second section is around sort of impact on children's development and outcomes around parental conflict. So we know children who are living in an environment with supportive health relationships and consistent routines are more likely to develop well-functioning biological systems and healthy brain circuits that promote that positive development and lifelong health. And we know there's been extensive research that provides us with a deeper insight around parents significantly influence the emotional development of their children. But what happens when babies and children are exposed to significant ongoing conflict within the home? They're then releasing those stress hormones which weaken the architecture of the developing brain, which causes ongoing health and development issues. And we work a lot, obviously, with the health services around baby in utero, especially, prenatal. And we know brain activity starts as early as 6 weeks and develops at a faster pace. We know the fetus is exposed to adrenaline and cortisol in the womb, pass through the placenta, and prenatal stress increases that fear and stress reactivity. And we know that neuroscience tells us that disease and illness we have as adults can be linked back and predetermined as roots in fetal life. So when mums are pregnant, carrying babies, it's very, very difficult to try and get them to remain calm. But bringing a new baby into the world is often one of the highest stressors that couples experience. So it's important as midwives and people who are working with pregnant ladies that they start to talk to them about the impact and the responses to stress that this can have on the baby. We also know through the research and the impressive work that paediatricians such as Professor Gordon Harold and others have done, the evidence base has now made great strides to illustrate that exposure to frequent, intense and poorly resolved conflict and what it can do to children's developmental outcomes and impair their life chances. So we know children are at risk of a range of health difficulties, including sleep disorders, digestive problems. Lots of children talk about having tummy ache and tummy problems, which can often be associated with some of the things that are happening for them at home. Fatigue, headaches, and reduced physical growth. That negative impact on those neurobiological processes, which can in turn affect children's emotional development, leading to behavioural problems, poor attachment, risk-taking behaviours, and eating disorders. Children and young people have distressed relationships with parents and may struggle to provide and build positive, warm relationships with friends and teachers and future partners. And children may be frightened and scared and may not want to go home, go missing from home, making them more vulnerable to exploitation. We also know that children may feel that they're the ones to blame or persuaded to take one parent's side over another or used as a scapegoat. Their social life may be affected as they do not want to take friends home or have sleepovers, and they may struggle to concentrate at school, less likely to succeed academically, have lower employability skills, and they may not want to attend school because they're too frightened to leave that parent at home. And we also know that there's long-term effects on young people. So as you can see, mental health difficulties, poorer academic outcomes, negative peer relationships, all of those things that are on the slide. But also we know that the impact of parental conflict can therefore be varied and long-lasting. And as well as the risk that relationship behaviours and problems are then repeated, so intergenerationally across their own relationships as they move into adulthood. So it's no wonder really when we know that children can pick up on those tensions and those atmosphere. It's no wonder that children sometimes when they become teenagers can often take flight and decide it's not worth being at home with parents as they're always fighting. And how do parents model healthy relationships if they're unable to effectively communicate with each other? How do our young people learn about resolving conflict, negotiation, and respect for themselves and others if all they see at home is anger, screaming, shouting, and frustration? So as we know, these consequences are for what children probably experience. So those young people having distressed relationships with their parents, children being frightened or scared, not wanting to go home. Their basic needs may be going unmet, unable to build positive, warm relationships with other adults, may be blaming themselves, may be used as a scapegoat, may not want to have children, other friends coming over for sleepovers, may not want to go to school, and so on and so forth. There's also been some significant research that's been done around parental conflict impacting on school effectiveness. So as you can see, it can place significant pressure and cost on schools as they deal with the consequences of the home environment. Evidence suggests that conflict between parents can negatively impact on those children's academic performance, with children from high conflict homes achieving lower scores in maths, language and verbal school ability tests. Children who experience parental conflict less likely to come to school ready to learn. They may have been disrupted, they may have had disrupted sleep, or they may, even at breakfast, the arguments may have been going on as soon as they've got up in the morning. And exposure to that ongoing hostile exchanges between parents has also been linked to emotional behavioural difficulties, which can sometimes play out in the classroom, including social and interpersonal problems with peers. And then if we start to explore the parent-child relationship, conflict between parents harms children in part because of that spillover effect. Parents in high conflict relationships tend to struggle with parenting their children, engaging in more criticism, aggression, making threats, shouting, and not just being there for them emotionally. At the other end of the spectrum, parents in conflict can produce lax and inconsistent parenting, that unstructured care, parents who simply don't pay much attention to their children because of all the things that are going on for them within that relationship. In either case, children may fail to form ongoing secure attachments to parents as a result. And this can also be a strain on that co-parenting relationship, with parents not supporting each other in the care of their children. How often do we hear, he's always at work, he's not interested, she's never here to help with the children, so it's no way when it comes to parenting the children, I don't need his help anymore, I can do it on my own. And they're so absorbed in their own problems, they're less likely to prioritise the needs of their children. And so children and young people can look to gaining that attention in other ways, putting themselves in quite vulnerable situations. So again, just to say that when parenting capacity is reduced, all these things that are on this slide are obviously going to have an impact on how they parent their children. So children are often caught in the middle of this destructive behaviour and have to take on lots of different roles. So as we said, that spy, maybe asking them to spy on the parent, especially if they're separated and maybe got a new partner, maybe trying to ask them to be mediators, or maybe to even get them to be the judge in what's happening. Because parents aren't capable of doing that for themselves, they often put that responsibility on children, which just shouldn't be happening, as we all know. So we see an incredible emotional burden that's ongoing for children and their parents, and we see that their developmental progress and outcomes are often compromised for this very reason. I just want to, sorry, I'm just going to just go back there. I just want you to then sort of play, the next slide is going to be about children's impact, how it affects children when they're actually watching or hearing their parents argue.
they say why they always argue about why one of them has more money than each other.
And does one want more money or what?
One wants more money, and the one who's got all the money doesn't give, only gives a little bit to my grandma. Well, once they were shouting, and it was really loud, and that our road is really long, and we were on one side having a walk, and then they started having an argument, and then they started shouting, and the people from the other side of the street could hear it. They were so loud. They were arguing in the kitchen, and I went in the front room and I sat on my dad's chair, and I was all curled up crying because I was upset. Sometimes it's not very good because they shout all day, and really I can't do my homework at school from St. Peter's on a Chain, and I can't do anything because they're shouting. Well, I just feel inside like a frost is coming inside, and everything's going wrong in the world. And then when they make up, then it feels like it's all coming back, and all the summer's coming back. If you're all, of course, arguing all the time, the children might get it in their minds and start doing it at school and doing it to their friends, and they have no friends. And then when they grow up and get married, they might start doing it thinking, this is what my mum and dad did, why don't I do it? Or if, say, the mum and dad argue, they split up, the child would think, well, that's the first idea, I'll split up then with my husband when I'm older. So it's not good to have arguments all the time, but I think now and then to learn what you're doing and see what you shouldn't do. It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel worried. It feels really scary, like they're going to break up and one's going to go that side and one's going to go that side. So I don't know who to choose to go with, because I love both of them very much. So I don't really like them shouting. It scares me a lot. Crying like this.
So as we can see, parental conflict has an impact on our children. And I've seen that video now probably about 10, 14, 15 times. And I still get a bit of a shiver when I watch it. I think it's just great. So the last sort of 5 minutes, I'm just going to sort of look about, because everybody who's on this masterclass today is from a wide range of services. So it's not sort of one size fits all. There's not just something one service can do above another service, although obviously, as in terms of North Yorkshire's Children and Families Service, we work very much with parents who are in conflict, using our tools that we've been trained in how to use to start to look at how best we can improve the communication between parents who are regularly, frequently, intensely in conflict with each other, and where that's having an impact on the children. But these next few slides are just maybe some ideas about how some of you in your service can maybe start to think a little bit about how best you could have some of those very difficult conversations, because it's not easy. None of this is easy. For many parents, it's the shame that's sort of there with them about the fact that their relationship is maybe not working very well, or maybe their relationship is not very strong, or they've maybe had previous relationships where they've been very much in high conflict, and it's just repeating. It's like history repeating itself. So for some of our parents, it can be very distressing to share some of that information. But we like to call it as opening the door. So you can help hugely by opening the door to conversations about relationships with the parents that you're working with. And by planting that seed, you can mean families get better and quicker access to the right support. So you could ask things like, when you're talking, maybe if you're in school and you're talking to parents about the child's behavior, maybe that you're seeing that challenging behavior that's quite difficult to be able to manage. Maybe you can talk to parents and sort of like ask about, something like, with all of these issues happening for you, how are you and your partner or husband or wife managing? Or do you think you're having more arguments and finding that you're not getting along? And are you getting support from your partner and managing these issues together? Just some of those questions can open the door and start to get parents to talk to people that they trust about some of the issues and some of the problems within their relationship. So let's think about how else we can help. We'd like practitioners and anybody that's working with parents to be interested and curious and take time to ask both parents how they are getting on. And again, lots of us struggle with trying to get both parents to actually talk to us and actually admit that there are issues within the relationship. The parental conflict program works really well when we get both parents who admit that, yes, they are going through a bit of a rocky patch, and yes, they would both like to have some support in order for them to be able to improve the communication within their relationship and to think about things before it escalates and that volcano erupts, as we talk about. Thinking about trying not to take sides, and sometimes this can be very difficult when you hear only one side. There's an expectation from that one parent maybe not to include the other parent in the discussions. So again, as in terms of early help and children's social care, we're often being told, I don't want you to bring dad in. I don't want you to involve dad in any of these discussions. This is my issue. This is my problem. I've got the issue. I want to just do this on my own. I don't want him to know, or vice versa. I don't want her to know. So it can be very difficult. But the idea is that we try and explain that they are both parents and both of them have a responsibility to think about their relationship and how the focus can be often lost on the child's needs and what that child's needs are. So make sure that you allow both parents to share the views of what's happening within that relationship. And by championing healthy relationships with families and normalizing that conversation about relationships and signposting parents to relationship support can all improve the relationships between our families. So again, we've got this slide is just saying, what do we need? We need attunement and engagement. We need a responsiveness. We need that respect and authenticity. We need clear communication. We need to be able to manage those communication breakdowns. We need to have emotional openness. We need to be able to understand one's own feelings, that empowerment, that strength building, assertiveness and limit setting, and building those coherent narratives in order for us to be able to help parents to open up about some of the issues that they're facing within their relationship. So just to summarise for the last couple of seconds, so I suppose children do better when they feel safe and secure. We know that. This feeling of well-being can be largely due to the exposure to healthy relationships within the home. And that's what we aim to achieve. We want children to be exposed to much healthier relationships, being able to observe that compromise, negotiation, conflict resolution. Understand that conflict is normal within a relationship. It's normal for children to see parents having a disagreement, having an argument, but it's also normal for them to be able to make up and to be able to show the children that they're in a happy, healthy relationship. And improving the health of relationship the families you work with is something you can have a real impact on. Support for relationships just doesn't need to be about specialist relationship support. It doesn't need to be about having to refer to Relate or having to bring in mediators or a mediation service. It can just be about a brief conversation about how you're getting on, how things within your relationship going. And there's plenty of room for anyone working with children or adults to play their part and offer an appropriate intervention when they feel they can. And then obviously there's lots of signposting that you can do to our service, to the children and families service, in which case we can then pick it up. So thank you for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed learning about parental conflict and the impact on children and young people. I just want to say that we've been very fortunate with our funding from the DWP. I was just explaining to Hayden at the very beginning that we've been given some funding in the last couple of years, which has helped us to do some workforce development. And some of you have already probably been invited to that. We've been doing some work around introducing parental conflict into schools. We've also been holding training sessions for schools to send any of their pastoral staff on. And as I said at the beginning, usually that's a day's training or a half a day at the most. But we also start to look at tools that you could be using as well if you were doing any of that work with parents. But we have got the opportunity now to apply for further funding for the next 3 years. So I'm going to take this opportunity really just to ask you that if you've got any ideas for future training opportunities for your service, just pop them into the chat for me and I can get back in touch with you, and we can look at how best we can help your service to tackle the problem around reducing parental conflict. And there's my email address if anybody wants any further information. Again, I can put in where you could find further information or further resources. There's a really good Relationship Matters website where families can really look at some of the different videos that they've got on there around sort of and freeze framing and stopping things before they escalate, and so on and so forth. So I've just taken it to 12:55. So I'm hoping, Hayden, that's okay. And I'll stop sharing now.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you very much for that. It's been a really, really informative session, and there's some comments in the chat reflecting that as well. So what I just wanted to do just before everybody goes and we finish the session, if anybody's got any questions first of all, for Sarah, just to raise before we move on to just some quick fire updates. I think there's some interest in terms of training resources.
I'm just looking now at some of the chat as well. That's great, because that's all the kinds of things that I can start to put into the next funding bid that we do, because schools are a huge resource that we can start to work with on best how to support children. And because obviously you don't have the same kind of time and resources that we do. The website is www.relationshipmatters.org. Yeah, Relationship Matters, all one word, all one word. If you struggle to get on it, just email me and I'll put up the send it to you. But thank you for taking the time to come along, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Yeah, so I think that there aren't any questions. So what I'll just move on to is the key updates, just to keep you appraised of some things that you might want to be aware of. Obviously, we hope that you are enjoying these masterclasses, and we've got some really great subjects coming up in the next few months. So in May, we've got about working with gypsies, Roma and tribal communities. I think that that's going to be a really quite interesting session, hearing from some frontline practice there. We've also will be launching our Be Aware or relaunch of our Be Aware section of our website, which has been extended to include parents and children as well. And we'll also be looking at the new professional development program from the Children and Families Service. And then we've got in July the quickfire safeguarding update. So that's our Heinz 57 varieties sort of different updates on various different things. With lots of information. All of our courses are available on our website, so the link's on the screen there. Can I just ask, on completion of a masterclass, you can get a certificate for these, but can you please complete the survey form so that we can actually get your feedback as to how effective you feel that these are, and how much, how much we enjoyed them, how we can improve them, and any other comments that you might have in relation to them as well. Just another reminder that Safeguarding Week is going ahead again. This is between Monday the 20th and Friday the 24th of June. It's going to be hosted by the Children's Partnerships, the Adults Boards and the Community Safety Partnerships for North Yorkshire, York and East Riding. We are following exactly the same sort of template as we did last year. So there'll be virtual webinars, presentations and workshops for professionals and members of the public alike. And more information will be made available on our website closer to Safeguarding Week, so that you'll be able to book yourself on any of those sessions. Also, all of the local safeguarding partnerships are also doing some more locally themed things in there as well. Again, that will all be included as well. Finally, just wanted to really draw your attention to all of the key links for the partnership. So if you need to contact us, there's the link to our contacts page and our general website link. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter at NYSCP1. We have a Facebook group if you go to NYSCP1 there as well. Our YouTube channel, which as I mentioned before is tremendously badly named at the moment, but we need people to subscribe so that we can reach that threshold and actually get NYSCP as the name for that. So please, after this session, go to our YouTube channel. You can just do a search for NYSCP and there you will find us, and subscribe to that channel. Then you'll get access to lots of great content, including previous masterclasses. We have our Instagram page as well, and we've got our podcast. So that's available on things like Pocket Casts, Google Casts and Spotify. We're not on iTunes yet, but we're aiming to try and get on there. And the latest one that we've had is about private fostering, and really what you need to know as professionals if you become aware of a private fostering arrangement, and what you need to do if you do become aware to make sure that that child is safe and secure in a private fostering arrangement. We've also got another podcast coming very soon, which is about sudden unexpected deaths in infancy. And then finally, on the first Monday of working Monday of every month, or first working day of every month, we have our e-bulletin that comes out. So please click on the link and subscribe there, and you'll get access to even more great safeguarding information. So unless anybody's got any further questions at all, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. Hope you've enjoyed the session. Please complete the feedback form that is online, and we'll hopefully see you in a future session. And thank you to Sarah as well for giving a great presentation. Thank you.
No props.